This happened just last year. My buddy Jimmy is pretty well connected in the music scene, specifically the dance and electronic music community that spans the East Coast, mostly centered around New Jersey and New York. It's actually impressive what he and his team have managed to build in just 2 years. Basically, their company hosts what they call events at high-profile venues, usually the top clubs or party spots in whichever city they're working in. Then they book the talent, which more often than not ends up being a big-name DJ, sometimes even borderline famous. I'm not super plugged into that scene myself, so I can't name names. But I've heard enough to know they've landed some serious heavy hitters. But back to the story. Jimmy and I go way back over 20 years. I've known him nearly my entire life, and he's been my best friend for most of it. Because of that, he always hooks me up. Me and a bunch of our hometown crew usually get Tinto his shows for free, and we get to hang out backstage or in the VIP sections with the talent. It's a real cool experience, one I probably don't thank him for enough. So last July 4th weekend, Jimmy had this massive event lined up on the Jersey Shore. It was supposed to be their biggest show yet, and everyone we grew up with was planning to be there. Jimmy invited me to head down early with him, and of course, I said yes. The three of us, me and our other friend Ryan, made the hour-and-a-half drive to the venue. We got there about 4 hours before doors opened. While Jimmy and his team got busy setting things up, Ryan and I didn't really have much to do. So we figured we'd get a head start on. Jimmy and his team had access to unlimited free booze, courtesy of the venue, and Ryan and I definitely took full advantage. By the time the first DJ started his set, we were already more than a little buzzed. So we figured our degenerate behavior was more or less justified. Fast forward a couple of hours, and we were completely wasted. Honestly, I can't remember a time since then when I've been that drunk, no Tevin close. Don't get me wrong, Ryan and I are grown men. We can handle our liquor. It wasn't about throwing up or making a scene. The real issue was the lowered impulse control and questionable decision-making that came with buying that far gone. But even so, we were having a blast, or at least from what I can remember as the night wound down. We reached that point where people either figured out how they were getting home, who they were going home with, or both. Luckily, Jimmy had booked an Airbnb nearby and promised Ryan and me beds, so transportation wasn't a concern. The second part, though, that was what had my attention. We made our way over to the bar and struck up a conversation with a couple of girls we found attractive. It didn't take long before we had a plan for how we were going to spend the rest of the night. Now, neither Ryan nor I are Calvin Klein models, but we're both over 6 feet tall. And for whatever reason, most of the guys who hang around the Jersey Shore tend to be on the shorter side. So being tall there gives you an even bigger edge than usual, and for whatever reason, that night it worked in our favor. It seems like the one quality most girls on the Jersey Shore care about isn't looks, build, or intelligence. It's shade. Don't ask me why. The female Jersey mind is still a mystery I've yet to crack. I'm probably butchering their names, but I'm pretty sure the two girls introduced themselves as Gianna and Marcella. This is about the point in the night when memory starts to get a little fuzzy. So forgive any gaps in the story from here on out. From what I can recall, it was actually Marcella who suggested we all leave together and take the party elsewhere. And Ryan and I weren't about to argue with that. Gianna handed each of us a drink and insisted we get on their level before we left. Despite the fact that Rihanna and I had probably already consumed the liquid equivalent of her entire body weight in alcohol. Yeah, I know girls handing drinks. Two guys sounds a little backward, and it is. But these two clearly weren't your average beachgoers. They had money. That much was obvious. We were all dressed and ready when, after finishing our drinks, the four of us made our way toward the venue's exit. As soon as we stepped outside, Marcella suggested we head back to her place. It caught me off guard. I'd assumed we'd be going back to our Airbnb, since in situations like this, the guys usually hosted. But both girls insisted that Marcel's beach house was way nicer than whatever inland spot we'd booked for the night. And honestly, they weren't wrong. It was right on the beach. Ryan and I didn't argue. We walked along the shoreline, talking the whole way. The girls were surprisingly sharp, smart, thoughtful, actually interesting. It was such a breath of fresh air to have a real conversation for once, instead of the usual empty, small talk about nightlife or whatever. Not just with girls, with drunk people in general. At one point though, I started to feel embarrassed. I realized I was too drunk to articulate my thoughts clearly, and I felt like I was coming off like an idiot. But this wasn't just normal drunk. It was ... different. My body felt heavy, like it was melting into itself. My legs turned flimsy, like they were made of cardboard, if that makes any sense. It got harder and harder to move. Even controlling my eyes and mouth felt like a struggle. Then numbness started, first in my hands, then spreading Something wasn't right. Just as quickly as the feeling came, it passed back to the usual drunken haze. At least for the time being. Right around then, we pulled up to the beach house. It was wild. Maybe I'm exaggerating because I was wasted, but it looked like something out of a professional athlete's real estate portfolio. We headed inside, kicked off our shoes, and ended up in what I think was the living room. I say think because the place was so outrageously luxurious. It was hard to tell. It was like stepping into another world. Minimalistic, yet decorative. I know those sound like opposites, but somehow, made sense in there. There were actual sculptures on pedestals, but it didn't feel cluttered or tacky. Everything seemed built into the space, like the furniture and art were just natural extensions of the walls. I wish I had the clarity to snap a photo, but my brain was elsewhere. Apparently, so was Ryan's, because not even 15 minutes after we arrived, he and Marcella had vanished into the depths of the house, leaving me alone with Gianna. She leaned in to kiss him, and that's it. That's the last thing I remember. Not the kiss itself, just her leaning in. That's where everything cuts to black. I don't recall feeling dizzy or drinking more or anything at all. Really, just ... nothing. There's this massive gap in my memory, hours long, that won't come back no matter how hard I try. And the weirdest part, I know I didn't pass out. There are texts on my phone, texts from me that prove I was awake and functioning. There's digital evidence that I was conscious, but I don't remember a second of it. And before you say it was just a blackout from drinking, no, this felt different. I hardly ever I've blacked out before. Plenty of times, but even then, I could still remember fragments, bits and pieces of the night. Flashes, moments, scattered, but enough to piece together a rough timeline. And here's the thing, every one of those times, I was way more drunk than I was that night. So just saying it was a typical blackout doesn't sit right with me, especially because Ryan went through the exact same thing at almost the exact same time. That kind of synchronicity, way too specific to be a coincidence. The next thing I remember, waking up, the sun was straight overhead, burning down in me. I was lying in a random patch of bushes over an hour from where the event took place. Not that I knew that right away. My phone wasn't in my pocket. Actually, nothing was. No phone, no wallet, no keys. And here's the twist. They weren't heaven, my pockets. I was wearing someone else's clothes, and not Ryan's. A complete stranger's. The only thing still mine wear me shoes. And even those were messed up. The laces had been ripped out, and they were completely soaked. My head was pounding. Everything was spinning. Like I'd woken up in the wrong version of reality. I just laid there, staring up at the sky, trying to piece together where the hell I was. There were bushes nearby, and I was wearing someone else's clothes. No wallet, no phone, no keys. From the state of my shoes, it looked like I'd been in water. Not long ago, but there was no smell of chlorine or salt. So, it wasn't a pool or the ocean. The worst part, the blankness. I couldn't remember anything after Gianna left. Nothing. And that's when the panic really set in. This wasn't just being hungover. I was scared. I had no clue how I got here. Had I crashed a car, gotten into a fight, been drugged? Had zero reference points, like someone had taken an eraser to the last 10 hours of my life. I stood up and looked around. No familiar buildings. No people. No beach in sight. Just a winding road cutting through more trees. The only thing that stood out, maybe a few 100 feet away, was a 7-11 dot, so I headed for it. It felt like the only anchor in an otherwise empty world. I walked in and told the guy behind the counter. Me, a long look, probably trying to figure out if I was scamming him, but eventually slid the phone over. The first number that popped into my head was my sister's. She's the only one, aside from my parents, whose number I still had memorized. There was no way in hell I was calling mom or dad. She picked up on the first ring. I tried to explain everything as best I could, though none of it made much sense, even to me. She gave me Ryan's number. I called him, then called again and again. No answer. That's when I really started to wonder if what happened to me happened to him too. Drugged, robbed, and dumped in some random bushes an hour away from where West started. I was just about to call the police when, crazy coincidence, Ryan walks into the same 7-11. We just stared at each other for a second, both stunned, before dapping each other up. He told me what happened to him. And sure enough, it was almost the exact same story. That sealed it for us. We knew something real had gone down. We immediately called Thepolis, thanking the 7-Eleven clerk profusely for letting us use the phone. A few minutes later, we're outside, recounting everything to the officers. At first, they took us seriously, listening carefully. But the more we explained, the more their questions started to shift. Are you sure you didn't just drink too much? Could you have wandered off and passed out somewhere? They weren't flat out accusing us of lying, but you could tell they were skeptical. I told them it didn't make sense that we'd drunkenly wander into a town over an hour away. on foot didn't seem like they appreciated that logic much. I ended up giving them my sister's number, hoping she could help confirm everything. She had already been tracking my phone using Find My iPhone. To everyone's surprise, the signal showed it was in the middle of a nearby parking lot, just a few minutes' drive away. The officers agreed to take us there, and sure enough, both of our phones were lying on the pavement, side by side. While it was a relief to have my phone back, it only strengthened the police's theory that we'd simply been drunk. They began insisting we probably hadn't been robbed at all, that we just lost our wallets the same way we'd apparently lost our phones. We tried to get them to investigate a house Marcella had brought us to, the one she claimed was hers, but they wouldn't budge. According to them, we were just too intoxicated to remember anything accurately. One of them even said, "Helps more than you think." Then they handed us their cards and told us to call if we remember nothing else. What really shocked us, though, was how reluctant they were to connect us with any other officers who might have been more willing to help. Instead, they just told us to find our own way home, said our phones still had charge, and left us there after they drove off. I finally looked through my phone for the first time, and that's when things got even weirder. There were messages sent from my phone to a bunch of people I knew: Jimmy, my parents, some coworkers, even a few girls I'd been talking to. On the surface, the texts all seemed normal. They sounded like Meekum, casual, totally coherent. It's the kind of stuff I would say on a regular night. But when I looked at them as a whole, none of them made sense. They contradicted each other. There was one message to Jimmy thanking him for the night and saying we'd crashed at a friend's place. Another to my dad said we were safe and had found a couch to sleep on. And then one to a girl I'd been texting just casually said I was home, thinking about her. Individually, they could all pass as believable, but together, the timeline didn't add up at all. That's when I noticed a ton of missed calls and messages from Jimmy. I called him back, and he sounded relieved, like genuinely freaked out. He said he thought Ryan and I were dead or something. He told us to stay put and he'd come pick us up. While we waited, Ryan and I canceled all our cards. Oddly, though none of them had been used, even though those girls had likely had our stuff for hours. We couldn't stop talking the entire ride home, trying to piece together what had actually happened. None of it made sense. Sure, it was obvious. We'd been drugged. That part was clear. But it didn't explain everything. First off, I've never heard of any drug roofie or otherwise that causes the kind of blackout we experienced. Most sources just say those drugs make you fall asleep, but we weren't asleep. We were conscious. The texts we sent confirmed that, and if someone went to the trouble of drugging us just to rob us, why not at least try? TOWs are credit cards. Nothing had been touched. It made even less sense considering we were the ones who approached them, not the other way around. Plus, if it was some kind of setup, it was carried out in a seriously risky place, their house. Or was it a house they'd broken into? Either way, it was a bold move. Jimmy thought maybe we were targeted. But again, we made the first move. We walked up to them. And that's not even the weirdest part. We somehow ended up in a random town, over an hour away, wearing clothes that weren't ours. As insane as it sounds, Ryan and I even checked ourselves for surgical scars, half joking, half serious, wondering if we'd been harvested for organs. There was nothing. Jimmy had another theory. They'd given us some kind of exotic drug at least. That's what we figured. It made sense in a twisted way. But what never added up was how we ended up in that town in the first place, or who switched our clothes. It definitely wasn't the girls. We never got any answers. But it's not like we just shrugged it off and moved on. Ryan and I actually drove all the way back to the shore, determined to find that house. We tried to retrace our steps, figuring if we just walked along the boardwalk, eventually we'd spot it again. It was on the beach, after all, and believe it or not, we found it. We walked up the path and rang the doorbell. An older man opened the door and asked what we wanted. I did the talking. I didn't want to give away too much or say anything that might get us in trouble. So I just asked if someone named Marcella lived there, or if he had a daughter or granddaughter around our age. He said, no, not even a maybe, just a firm, confused no. So I made up the story about a girl lying to us, claiming the house was hers. Strangely enough, he found that kind of amusing. He even laughed a little. And that was the end of it. But walking away from that house, I felt ... off. Not scared, exactly. More like a heavy, sick feeling deep in my gut, like something terrible had happened to us, something we couldn't remember or understand, and maybe never would. For a long time after that, I couldn't shake the feeling that those girls were part of something way bigger than us, something dark. Like maybe they'd planned to hurt us, or worse, and at the very last second, they changed it through your minds. Why? I don't know. I probably never will. But if something ever comes up with the story, somehow continues, I'll send another update.